It's June 22nd here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with President Yoon wrapping up his BIE visit. His last day at the official reception in Paris was, again, all about endorsing Busan as the 2030 World Expo host. Yoon is now headed for Hanoi for his Vietnam state visit. More U.S. rate hikes are on the way within the year, as the fight against inflation still has a long way to go. That's according to the U.S. Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Kia America, Samsung, and SK Group have made it onto Time Magazine's annual list of 100 most influential companies. In fact, Kia America's unexpected race to the top of U.S. EV sales has also been acknowledged. On his final day in Paris, President Yoon declared his Paris Initiative. Now, that is detailing out basic principles that the world should adopt to secure a new digital order. Our top office correspondent, Oh Soo-young reports.
President Yoon has proposed a new global body and a universal set of norms for digital development to ensure that the freedom and welfare of people around the world are not harmed by technology. The South Korean leader announced his Paris Initiative on Wednesday, speaking at the Sorbonne University in the French capital.
발명, 기술 개발, 예술 창작 등 사람과 AI의 콜라보를 통한 놀라운 성과를 만들어내는 한편 그 독창성의 원천과 법적 권리 관계에 관해 엄청난 혼란을 빚어내고 있습니다. 또한 그 과정과 결과에 대한 통제가 불가능해지는 중대한 사회적 리스크를 일으키기도 합니다. 그렇기 때문에 국제적으로 통용되는 보편적 디지털 질서가 중요합니다.
Given the borderless, immediate and connected nature of digital technologies, Yoon said a universal digital order is needed on a global scale. He first and foremost established that digital advancement should serve to expand human freedom, dignity and welfare. Second, Yoon noted that a clear definition of rights to digital use and assets needs to be clarified to promote active transactions and the development of data. In this regard, digital access should be open for all, with digital literacy education crucial for such efforts. Yoon called for global collaboration to bridge digital literacy gaps. Deeming data and digital information public goods, the president emphasised that fair access and equal opportunity for all should be guaranteed. He further raised the need for a fair evaluation and reward system to incentivise investments and development efforts. In order to prevent social harm, Yoon also said information on social risks must be shared and publicised promptly with a regulatory system in place. Any violation would be deemed illegal and sanctioned. Most importantly, the South Korean leader said the international community must join hands in such regulatory efforts. He proposed creating a global body to standardise and initiate such basic norms within the context of the digital economy and society. To establish the institution, he suggested United Nations organisations could lead the conversation, noting that the president was inspired by various discussions, including at the G20, Davos, and the New York Digital Vision Forum last September. His economic secretary said a multilateral set of norms will continue to be developed through intellectual discourse.
It is especially meaningful that the initiative was proposed in Paris, the birthplace of the Enlightenment and the Civil Revolution.
The secretary said the president's initiative is not just limited to artificial intelligence, but can cover the entire digital spectrum and be applied universally in all countries in any stage of their digital transformation. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Paris.
And President Yoon gave one last push to tout Busan as the 2030 World Expo host at the official BIE reception on Wednesday. There, he reiterated solidarity against crises facing the world. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
President Yoon wrapped up his visit to Paris by attending the official reception for South Korea's bid to host the 2030 World Expo in Busan. A reception is held by each of the candidates competing for the Expo before 179 BIE member states voted in November. The two other cities, Riyadh and Rome, hosted theirs on Monday and Tuesday respectively. President Yoon, attending with First Lady Kim Gun-hee, reiterated that the Busan Expo will be the one to unite the world to create a solution platform for global crises, which has been labeled the Busan Initiative.
기후변화, 디지털 전환, 식량, 보건, 그리고 교육 분야에서 협력 확대 방안을 모색할 것이며 모든 나라가 자신의 고유한 문화와 전통을 마음껏 표현할 수 있는 문화 엑스포를 구현할 것입니다.
Also attending the reception were prominent Korean business leaders such as Samsung Electronics Chairman Lee Jae-yong and Hyundai Motors Chung Hee-sun. Acknowledging their presence, President Yoon underscored South Korea's advanced technology and said the Busan Expo will have the most advanced technology and the world could come together to share ideas and innovation.
부산 세계 박람회에서 잉태되는 새로운 기술과 아이디어는 인류의 지속 가능한 발전, 국제사회의 번영에 기여할 것입니다.
According to the top office, as President Yoon was meeting with attendees, he heard good responses regarding the presentation at the General Assembly. Prior to this reception, President Yoon also attended a ceremony for investing by European companies into South Korea. There, 6 high-tech European companies pledged $940 million of investment into South Korea. The companies include Imerys, a French battery solution manufacturer, Umicore, a Belgian cathodes company, and Continental, a German auto parts company. They're expected to build production facilities, R&D centers, and wind power plants in South Korea. President Yoon vowed to support them during the process.
글로벌 스탠다드에 맞지 않는 규제는 과감하게 철폐하고 첨단 산업과 공급망 안정에 기여하는 기업에게는 확실한 인센티브를 제공하겠습니다. 투자 과정에서 필요한 지원이나 어려움이 있으면 언제든지 저와 한국 정부에 말씀해 주시기 바랍니다.
According to the top office, with this latest investment commitment, South Korea has now gained $16.5 billion in overseas investment in the first half of this year, the most ever for the same period. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And the South Korean leader is now headed to Vietnam for his state visit, which begins Thursday morning. For his trip to South Korea's third biggest trading partner, Yoon will be accompanied by a 205-member business delegation, the largest ever for an overseas presidential visit. The official welcoming ceremony, summit, and state dinner will be held on Friday, hosted by Vietnamese President Vo Van Trong. The leaders are expected to discuss expanding bilateral ties, which were upgraded to a comprehensive strategic partnership last December. Yoon will also meet with high-profile politicians, as well as business leaders and overseas Koreans while there. Workers are more stressed than ever. In fact, stress in the workplace reached an all-time high last year for the second straight year. Why? What's responsible for this uneasy feeling? Today, we're joined by Professor Sun-mi Hwang. Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Sure. So, according to Gallup's latest State of Global Workplace report, stress in the workplace reached an all-time high last year for the second straight year. Why such depressing figures for 2 years in a row?
Oh, in the last 2 years, we had a COVID-19 pandemic and we still have it. That means many of us survived from global financial difficulties, the fear of job losses, and also we had to adapt to the sudden changes to online working environment as we are doing right now. These situational reasons could add to the stress for the last 2 years. But difficulties at work have always been an important stress for people, which means work is a really important matter to human beings. We tend to be sensitive to problems that we consider are most valuable to us. Workplace stress is a typical example, as well as family relationships. We all want to express ourselves from work, and we want to achieve from it. These can improve us, and at the same time, it can stress us out.
Right, we do spend much of our time at work, not in our bed. So that's definitely the reason why. And also pandemic has played a crucial role in really upgrading that stress level, right?
Right.
Then let's talk about it by region. Workers in North America and East Asia were particularly more stressed, and stress among people in Turkey was the highest. And the stress level here in South Korea came to 40, which is slightly lower than the global average. Let's talk about these figures.
I also read Gallup's latest findings, and what was interesting for me was that North America and East Asia had both high stress level and high employee engagement at the same time. Of course, high is a relative term compared to other regions. Employment engagement in Europe and Central Asia was 13% and 15% respectively, while North America was 31% and South Asia was 33%. The engaged level in East Asia, including Korea, was also higher than in Europe. Of course, the exact correlation between the two variables can only be found when research is done, but there seems to be some effect between workplace-oriented culture and work-related stress. And of course, differences in welfare levels between countries will be another impact.
Right, definitely. Maybe the hours that we here in Korea spend at work has definitely played a role in that stress level, maybe.
I think so, yes.
Now that you've mentioned the work engagement, only 23% of workers around the world say they are engaged in their work, meaning they're dedicated and focused on their job. Then why high stress and low work engagement?
Yes, we really need to look at this issue deeply and seriously, I think. I think it's the right time to redefine the concepts involved in work. Work is important to people, and this fact is not going to change. However, the commonly used concepts in work psychology, such as job, aptitude, career, value, these are all changing. For example, in traditional workplace, the roles of employers and employees were fixed, but now there are more people working alone. So let's say when we call a person a low engaged worker, it can mean that he's less committed to the job he's hired for, but he could be committed to his newly defined career. I believe we live at a historical moment to go beyond the traditional concept of work, and we need to consider which activities we should call work or workplaces.
Right. Concepts and definitions of work and workplaces are constantly evolving, especially after the pandemic years.
Yeah, I really agree to you.
Is work stress something that we have to live with for the entire life? I mean, how can we as individuals manage all the stress, tension, and the pressure in daily settings?
I worked as a team manager in the startup's in-house counseling service before. And what I realized back then is that most people want to do their job well and want to be recognized by others. We all do that. That's why it causes us pain when work doesn't go well. And if we call this pain of work work stresses, then yes, I agree that work stress is something we have to live with. As a mental health professional, one tip I can offer is that we better to distinguish whether workplace stress comes from a company's systematic problems or from personal characteristics, because we often confuse those two. Recently, many companies have set up counseling services to create a supportive working environment. And I hope there will be more such workplaces, because employees can feel secure and protected when they know that company really cares about their personal feeling and their personal difficulties. And I've witnessed it through many cases that this sense of security can really actually reduce stress level and increase productivity at work.
Right, maybe defining and dissecting the origin of the stress that we get from the workplace may be one way to get to know about our stress and maybe lift the burden off at work.
Sure, sure.
All right, Professor Huang, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me again. Thank you.
Just when we thought we were nearing the end of the U.S. rate hike cycle, the Fed chief signals that there could be more hikes this year. Now, that is simply because the fight against inflation is not yet over. Kim Hyun-sung reports.
More Fed rate hikes are to be expected in the future. That's what Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell hinted at his testimony before the House Financial Services Committee on Wednesday.
Inflation pressures continue to run high, and the process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go.
His words came just a week after the Fed's brief pause on one of the most hawkish rate hiking campaigns in history. 10 straight rate hikes, non-stop, from March 2022. Right now, the Fed rate hike stands at 5.25%. However, on Wednesday, Powell made clear that this was not a pivot, but just a cool down in speed.
It may make sense to move rates higher, but to do so at a more moderate pace.
He said that while there were signs of slight improvement in the labor market, there was still an imbalance of labor demand exceeding the supply of workers. Also, inflation still hovers high above the target 2%, with total personal consumption expenditures rising 4.4% for the year ending in April. Powell said that it could take some time for the full effects of the Fed's monetary tightening policies to trickle down through the economy. The latest projections from the majority of Fed officials suggest there to be at least 2 more rate hikes this year, which would push rates to a 22-year high. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Time magazine is out with its 100 most influential companies list for 2023. And Kia America has been listed in the innovators category for its unexpected race to the top of EV sales in the U.S. Lee Eun-jin has the details.
Every year since 2021, Time magazine releases its annual list of 100 most influential companies split in 5 categories: leaders, disruptors, innovators, titans, and pioneers. And for the 2023 list, 3 South Korean companies have made it onto the top 100. Samsung and SK Group were listed under the titans category as smartphone trendsetters and battery makers. And Kia America made it to the top of the list in the innovators category for its unexpected race to the top of the U.S. electric vehicle sales. Kia vehicles have a new reputation. Kia America President and CEO Yoon said during an interview with Time magazine that people are surprised when they get into a Kia vehicle because it's not the Kia they remember. In 2022, 60% of its customers were new to the brand. Tesla still holds pole position in U.S. electric vehicle sales, but Kia America shed its reputation for inexpensive cars and hit a new annual sales record in 2022 with its launch of the EV6 crossover, which took the brand into second place in EV sales for most of the year in the U.S. Kia America has been harmed by last year's Inflation Reduction Act, which requires EVs to be assembled in North America in order to qualify for tax credits. But CEO Yoon says the company is gradually overcoming the challenge thanks to the tax credits offered for leasing. To stay in the race for U.S. electric vehicle dominance, Kia is planning to begin production of their newest EV, the EV9, in West Point, Georgia next year. 15 EV models are planned for Kia's global lineup by 2027. Lee Eun-jin, Arirang News.
Seoul City aims to become the world's largest startup hub. Mayor Oh Se-hoon on Wednesday announced a $1.3 billion spending package that aims to foster at least 50 unicorn companies by the year 2030. Now, unicorn meaning startups that eventually become worth $1 billion. The plan will see around 1,000 new firms accommodated in the Seongsu-dong neighborhood in East Seoul, an area that's popular for new and upcoming companies. The city is also planning to build a robot cluster to develop startups in what are called future industries.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the North Atlantic Ocean. The rescue operation for the missing submersible taking tourists to the wreckage of the Titanic has reported hearing banging sounds. Now, the sounds were detected on Tuesday and Wednesday, but the source has not been confirmed. It's a race against time to find the submersible, as it's believed that the 5 people on board have less than 12 hours of oxygen remaining. The search operation is now covering a surface area twice the size of the U.S. state of Connecticut. But operations are challenging due to the remote search area. The Titanic lies 600 kilometers off the coast of Newfoundland and almost 4 kilometers below the ocean's surface. Now, OceanGate, the firm behind the Titanic trip, was previously warned by a former employee that its experimental vessel could face catastrophic problems. Turning over to Paris, at least 37 people have been injured following an explosion on Wednesday in a building close to the French capital's Latin Quarter. 4 of the injured are in serious condition. Search operations are also underway for 2 people believed to be missing beneath the rubble. Hundreds of firefighters have been deployed to the area and have extinguished a fire resulting from the blast. The cause of the explosion is still being investigated, but it's believed to have been caused by a gas leak. To Honduras now, at least 46 women have been killed during a riot at a women's prison about 25 kilometers from the country's capital. According to local authorities, Tuesday's riot was a gang-led response to efforts to crack down on corruption in the prison. Most of those killed were burned to death as gang members reportedly went to cells of rivals and locked them in before dousing them with a flammable liquid. Others were shot or hacked to death with machetes. Some of the bodies are still being identified. Honduran President Xiomara Castro said the riot was planned by gangs and that guards at the 900-person penitentiary had known it would take place. And finally, yoga enthusiasts around the world celebrated International Day of Yoga on Wednesday. In Times Square, over 8,000 people took part in a program called Mind Over Madness Yoga. The day also saw people across India practice the meditative exercise on aircraft carriers, in the mountains and on trains. Observed every year on June 21st, International Day of Yoga was adopted by the United Nations in 2014. The day was even observed by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was at the UN in New York while on a state visit to the United States. Yoga is a physical, mental and spiritual practice that started in India over 5,000 years ago.
Good morning. After some very welcomed relief from the heat yesterday, temperatures are set to rise again. Readings will go up about 5 degrees higher today here in the capital. Then sweltering heat is in the forecast to end the week and into the weekend. Now, sunny skies to start out the day, then mostly cloudy skies with scattered rain showers expected during the day with thunderstorms and hail at times with up to 40 millimeters of rain in the forecast, while the capital region looks like receiving showers after lunchtime. Jeju and South Coast regions will be under sunnier skies with stronger UV rays today. And also it's Tano today, considered to be one of the major traditional holidays. And on this day, farmers got to have a short break after rice planting and also wish for a fruitful harvest. Meanwhile, afternoon highs will be 4 to 7 degrees higher than yesterday in most parts of the country. Now, monsoon rain is forecasted on Sunday on the south coast and Jeju Island, and the whole nation will be affected by a monsoonal front early next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
wraps up our Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. Thank you for watching.
The World Expo Busan will be a solutions platform addressing humanity's complex and urgent challenges. The Busan Expo will be a venue creating new business opportunities. We will make it the best World Expo of all time. Busan is ready. We are united. Let's transform our world and navigate toward a better future. See you in Busan in 2030.
Loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity. Infinite creativity and hope. We want our children to grow up to be happy. Animation, watched by children all around the world. So that joy can be felt when our animation is watched. This is the reason we make animation and share with the world. K Animation, befriending children all over the world.
어쩌다 마주친 We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights and new styles and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's June 22nd here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dainhong.
Happy Thursday, everyone.
Happy Thursday. And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. A report from a Kathmandu-based Center for Integrated Mountain Development warned that glaciers in the Himalayan mountain ranges may lose up to 80% of their volume within this century. Climate change is posing a major problem. Last year, Europe saw new highs in sea surface levels, along with temperatures warming twice as much as the global average since the 1980s. Moving on to our second story. President Yoon Suk-yeol and First Lady Kim Gon-hee have wrapped up their visit to France, attending the General Assembly of the BIE to support Busan's bid to host the 2030 World Expo. During their visit, South Korea's First Lady met up with France's First Lady and discussed how K-pop and K-culture can strengthen cooperation. Kim Gon-hee specifically mentioned Blackpink's appearance at a gala concert in France and noted how memorable it was to see Parisian K-pop fans. And lastly, over the past few days, you may have seen the Titanic hit the headlines. 5 people have gone missing on a submersible on Sunday in a quest to explore where the Titanic sunk back in 1912. There's been a desperate search to find the vessel, and those on board are predicted to only have enough oxygen to last until around midday Thursday. Officials on Tuesday said their sonar did pick up banging sounds, but they couldn't identify whether this was recently heard and for how long. And we're going to take a closer look at the third news item. OceanGate CEO and founder Stockton Rush is among the 5 on board. There's also a British businessman, Pakistani billionaire and his son, and a French diver. And these 5 have gone aboard the submersible named Titan to find the Titanic 4,000 meters under the North Atlantic. And some people who heard this news said it's partly on these high-profile passengers who voluntarily paid to go on this dangerous mission. Others shared their hope for the team to be rescued. Now, I would like to ask our panelists here in the studio what they think, starting with Walter.
Of course, I've been keeping a close eye on the news as well and the progress of the story, and sadly what I've been hearing is not great news.
Yeah.
There hasn't been any positive news to come out of this. I mean, like, I took a look at the submarine and it looks quite, I would say, flimsy compared to a lot of the other submarines that we've seen. They can actually go down there. Some of the interior functionalities as well are store-bought, which I think is just very strange for someone who's paying billions or millions of dollars to go underwater in this very dangerous place. But yes, time is really running out. By the time this episode finishes, or even probably during, there's probably going to be some updates here in Korea. At least we should know. I don't know if it's a good result or a bad result by 7 p.m. because that's when the oxygen is due to run out. But many experts are basically saying they need a miracle.
Yeah, they need a miracle, and we're all hoping for one. But let's look at another angle to this story, which includes extreme tourism. As I mentioned, a lot of people who saw this news mentioned, why would someone pay billions and billions of dollars just to go to such a dangerous place? Like, what's behind the appeal of extreme tourism?
Yes, and before we mention that, I'm truly devastated as well, and I do hope they get rescued. But you mentioned a very good and interesting point. This isn't the first time many people have gone to extreme to sort of heighten up their lives or to get this crazy adrenaline rush on extreme adventures. And Walter, you mentioned briefly before we started this conversation that more astronauts have been to space than people have been down for research purposes to look for Titanic. That's how dangerous this mission was, and I'm sure people went knowing it. But probably it was the danger and the risks that drove them to this extreme. So this actually highlights, and as people commented, how far some rich people would go to get extreme things out of their lives.
And as we said, we are all hoping for a miracle here in the studio. And that was our news feed for this Thursday. Let's move on to our main discussion topic of the day. It's a question we've been asking for years. Should we abolish the death penalty? Take a look at the screen to find out where South Korea stands on this issue. South Korea has the death penalty, but the country hasn't executed anyone since 1997. Earlier this month, officials have decided to remove the sunset clause for the death penalty. The sunset clause required those who get the death penalty to be executed within 30 years of their final sentencing. Removing this clause aligns with the growing number of human rights activists and groups claiming that the death penalty goes against international order to respecting fundamental human rights. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. Where do most South Koreans, specifically millennials, Gen Z, stand on the death penalty debate? 2. Compared to other parts of the world, many seem to be for the death penalty in Korea. What are the main reasons behind this? 3. How does this differ from other parts of the world? We're going to be talking about a contentious issue, the death penalty. Should we keep it or eradicate it? Before I ask this question to our panelists in the studio, Cheska, why don't you first explain to us what South Korea's death penalty laws are like right now?
Absolutely, sure. So we're the only 4 OECD countries that actually practice the death penalty, including the United States, China, and Japan. However, since 1998, South Korea has practically imposed a de facto moratorium on executions, meaning since our last execution in 1997, we haven't had any. So instead, we grant presidential pardon or life imprisonment. And as of today, we have about 59 prisoners on death row. But the debate on whether we should keep it, since we have suspended it for so long, has been ongoing since.
Yeah, and as we just saw in our video just now, the Justice Ministry did give the green light to get rid of the so-called sunset clause, which many have interpreted as practically getting rid of the death penalty and instead enforcing life sentences. Could you elaborate more on this, Walter?
Yeah, right. So, yes, and you're right. The sunset clause doesn't actually mean it's the abolishment of the death penalty. What the sunset clause actually means is that it gives government, lawmakers, as well as parliament, etc., time to reevaluate the actual merits of the crime and whether they apply to today's situation. Now, after a certain period of time, in this case, it was 30 years, and since the 30-year death penalty has expired, many thought that the offender would just go free, but this is not the case, and therefore it would probably be overturned to a life sentence.
But a lot of experts said they were happy to see some type of discussion actually happen about the death penalty, because here in Korea it seems that not a lot of legal discussions were brought about for quite a long time. And now I would like to ask you guys a $1 million question. Where do we, millennials and Gen Z in Korea, stand on the death penalty debate, including yourself? I mean, when I talk with my friends after looking at societal issues, we always say, should we actually execute these hard prisoners who commit horrible, horrible, heinous crimes? What about you? Where do you stand on this issue?
You said $1 million question, and I think that name deserves it. It's this truly tough question because, it's about somebody else's life and we have no say in it. But so I would first like to refer to a survey done by Real Meter to show how South Korean public actually thinks about it. So let's take a look at the screen for more specifics. Now, this vote is actually fairly even, half and half, with slightly more upper hand to yes on death penalty. And now the no also includes the capital punishment and abolishment of capital punishment as well. Now, this voting ratio was very similar across all age groups up to the 60s. So people thought we do need capital punishment, slightly more people. But now for the MZs, I think they're more vocal on having strict laws and regulations because, as we have seen, there have been a lot of judicial outcomes that were far too lenient, that really caused an outcry from the general public, including myself. And Yoon, you actually delivered this on the news feed just yesterday. But Walter, you also know there was a round kick assailant
in Busan.
Who also sexually assaulted this woman, who was only ended up given 20 years, and he had, hear this, 18 priors. So he had already been in and out of prison since juvenile court or whatever for 18 times, and even at this time he was only given 20 years. So how, as the general citizen, are we supposed to feel safe?
Yeah, we don't feel safe.
I don't. I personally don't.
And you know what? Whenever I'm with my friends, we always talk about this. South Korea does seem to have very slap on the wrist type of penalties. They don't seem to have very strong-headed approaches to penalizing their criminals, which is why a lot of people, as you mentioned, especially MZers, seem to be for the death penalty, saying that stronger the better. But where do you stand on this issue?
Okay, so for instance, I studied criminology, so therefore I had to take it from my academic background as well as my personal view. So with many things, justice-related issues like this, it's just not as easy as stopping something, right? Yes. First, there is human error, of course. There have been a number of cases where people have been proven innocent after they've been executed, which is obviously horrible.
Absolutely.
And this is because of the development of DNA, this has proven like these cases were innocent. And you can't obviously take that back.
Yeah.
Now, the way I see it, I think the death penalty is the easy way out for some prisoners. It's controversial. Some people, I think, would agree with me, though. But not all offenders want to die, so I guess they do want to continue living. But from a personal perspective, right? Like, if I was the victim in some sort of way, or someone hurt someone I truly loved, I'd want to see them rot in jail. I don't think that the death penalty, I think the death penalty might be too good for them. I want them to live the rest of their life with the thought of knowing that they will never get out.
Gotcha.
And therefore they, sure, they have to get on with their lives. However, they won't have the freedom and they won't have the luxury of what we enjoy and take for granted.
You think that'd be a better penalty and a consequence that would last with them for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, my personal reading.
Yeah, and it's definitely, this is such a contentious issue, and because it has to do with your life we're talking about. And we're going to find out what our viewers abroad then think about this issue. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them said. Doina Arhire said in Romania there is no death sentence. There is a saying though, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Yet this applied a long time ago. Even if someone commits a crime, it's judged and sentenced with years in prison. Now, FWG said, no, we don't have it in Uruguay. Uruguay doesn't have an official religion, but the most practiced one is Catholicism. And one of the commandments is, you shall not kill. So we do have life imprisonment instead. Hussein said about half of the U.S., including my state, have the death penalty. I'm against it because it's an easy way out for criminals. Walter, we have someone who agrees with you on that.
Yeah, like I said. Again, that was me trying to get my point across.
Okay, you have way too many ideas.
Yeah. So, like I said, for some people, I actually heard recently there was a offender who wished for the death penalty.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is just an easy way out for people who don't value life the way we all do.
Yes.
And it is an easy way out because the death, many people are scared of death because it's painful.
Right.
But the process that I hear that they go through to be executed is not painful.
Yeah.
So it seems like the easiest way out.
But as Cheska mentioned earlier in our discussion, we're one of the only 4 countries in the OECD that has the death penalty, which shows that the global trend is getting rid of the death penalty. Could you elaborate on this a bit?
Yeah, so like it's not just we're one of 4 OECD countries, but about 2/3 of the world's countries are for abolishing the death penalty, and it does appear to be increasing due to human rights, of course. There are many cases, country by country, on reasons why citizens want to get rid of the death penalty. But as Canada, as an example, the crime rate has actually fallen by 42%. 26 years after the abolition of the death penalty, Now, is this a correlation or a causation? I'd have to look more into it, but yeah, it does seem to decrease the crime.
All right, and to find out more on that, why don't we include an expert to add a bit more depth into our discussion of the day? We're now going to hear from an assistant professor of law at the University of South Carolina. It's Professor Madeline K. Wisselcheck. Great to have you here, Professor.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, I'd like to ask you the first question. How's the death penalty being applied in the States?
So the United States retains the death penalty, and it's the only nation in the Americas that does for ordinary crimes. But we have a federal system, so states have different laws. So 24 states have the death penalty, 23 have abolished the death penalty, and 3 have moratorium that were put in place by the governor. That's Oregon, California, and Pennsylvania. And the death penalty in the United States continues to decline, and it remains very localized. So in 2022, we had 18 people executed in only 6 of the 50 states, and only 13 out of 50 states have executed someone in the past 10 years.
I see.
And you mentioned that some states have actually overturned or decided not to have capital punishment. Why is this, and how has this affected the crime rates in these specific states?
So states that don't use the death penalty anymore have done so for many different reasons. Some out of concern for the accuracy of the process. One of you had mentioned that there had been exonerations. Some people believe in the inhumanity and indignity of execution, the cost of such punishment, and actually botched executions and the torturousness of the actual death can also contribute. So the first state to abolish the death penalty in the United States did so a very long time ago in 1846 in Michigan. And Virginia, the first southern state to abolish the death penalty in the United States, did so in 2021. States that have abolished the death penalty actually have lower murder rates in the United States than states that have kept the death penalty. And there's actually no credible evidence that the death penalty deters crime. Along with long sentences, we know that long sentences don't deter crime. Much more deterring is the fact that one believes that they will actually get caught. And in the United States, the issue of race and poverty, as in the rest of the world, are very big issues in the death penalty. Black and Latina people are sentenced to death at disproportionate rates, especially if their victims are white, and that has led many people to oppose the death penalty. And of course, the folks on death row are almost always poor and have often had very poor legal representation.
I see.
Right. I know that that's a huge problem in the States, is poor legal representation, and especially for the people who might not be able to afford it and therefore obviously have a very weak representative, right? Yep. So, but here in Korea, many youth are for the death penalty. What's it like in the United States? Are you seeing the younger generations also be more or against?
So that's so interesting to me. Support for the death penalty in the U.S. remains at all-time lows. And we also know that depending on how you ask the question, people respond very differently. So in the U.S., about 55% of Americans say they support the death penalty when asked outright, do you support it or not? A different study found about 46% of Americans support it. But in general, we think that a little over half of the population does. More detailed survey questions that address the death penalty in more detail often find that majorities oppose the use of the death penalty, though, once you take into account that the people who receive it have histories of abuse, of mental illness, of brain damage, intellectual disability, and many are veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. And also, if you give people the option of life without parole in the alternative, about 60% of people choose that. In terms of how different groups of people in the U.S. think about the penalty, age, race, and political party make people's views very different. So young people in the U.S. are less supportive of the death penalty than older people. About 51% of 18 to 29-year-olds approve of the death penalty, compared with about 61% of Americans 55 and older.
I see. All right, thank you so much, Professor Wisselchuk. It was a pleasure to have you here on our show and hear from you today.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
Thank you.
You know, Professor Wisselchuk just gave us so much insight on this issue, a lot of information, but of the many points she made, which one captivated your attention the most, Cheska?
Actually, the fact that she said based on the question that you ask the surveyors, you might be able to get a different response. And it's interesting because in the States, she said the older age group actually were more pro to capital punishment, right? But based on the Real Meter survey that I looked at
in Korea,
actually the 30s had the highest rate of yes to capital punishment. So I think this actually raises the question of the younger generation in South Korea thinking that we probably need an update on the legal system.
For sure. And why do you think that those in their 30s here in Korea have such a proactive stance on the death penalty compared to those in the States? States?
Obviously, there's a lot of human rights movements these days and a lot more attention towards like a citizen's, right to do something. Everyone is looking for equality. I think there is some sort of link there. What is also surprising was that she also mentioned, which I talked about with Canada, was that there was a decrease in crime, but it's not a correlation between knowing that the death penalty is abolished as well as, the decrease in crime. It's also a very similar statistic to saying that when CCTVs are installed in certain areas, that crime decreases. That's also a myth, actually. It doesn't deter crime, it just stops people from maybe going that way.
I see. So there's no direct correlation there.
It doesn't seem so, no.
But I would rather live in a place where it has a lot of CCTVs.
You're living in one.
Yeah.
South Korea, there's so many CCTVs anywhere. Now, I would like to wrap up our discussion by asking you to your final thoughts based on our discussion and interview with the professor. Where do you stand on the death penalty issue now?
Well, so the question is, like, when I go from another personal perspective, is how much am I paying in my tax towards these people? They have committed heinous crimes, or even people who are just in there for minor crimes as well. We are paying a lot of our tax money towards keeping them alive, so to speak. Now, I did a little digging. I know that California spends roughly $90,000 to $103,000 annually to keep prisoners in prison.
Wow.
And the Nevada legislature found that the median cost in their state is $1.26 million annually for sentencing to execution.
Wow.
So that's a lot of taxpayers' money like going towards this.
So would you be for or against?
Personally, I'm still very much on the fence. Like I mentioned before, if I wanted, if I was victimized, I would want my prisoner to rot in hell. But yes, I'm still very much on the fence from the academic point of view and also the personal.
Yeah, it's a very tricky question, but where do you stand, Jessica?
I mean, I would like to quote Professor today and say what decreases a crime and not necessarily the capital punishment, but how easily you're going to be caught. And I would also like to add the punishment that you'll be getting subsequent to your crimes. Now, as an MZ, I really want to say I don't particularly feel safe given how our judicial system is giving out punishments to the crimes that happening, the drunk driving, the sexual assaults, the recent assault that we've been talking about. So I think the most important thing is that our judicial system quickly catches up to what is happening in the society so that we truly feel safe as taxpayers to really live in the society.
That's a good point. We'll end off right there. And All Right will be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Jessica Dain-hong.
Pleasure's always mine, thank you.
And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.
Loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to